And I thank Chairman McHenry for putting together this outstanding panel. Thank our witnesses for addressing what I believe to be the most consequential national security and economic security challenge of our generation, our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China, and countering the threat from the CCP. I want to specifically compliment Mr. Fetto for his testimony that as we look at investment screening, outbound investment, and this important dimension of our economic competition with the PRC, that this is an issue that Congress needs to deal with, and that creating an investment screening mechanism by executive order would be a major mistake. Now, I will compliment the Trump administration for the executive order that banned U.S. investment in certain Chinese military industrial companies, and I would also compliment the Biden administration for expanding on that executive order with its own to expand it to surveillance companies. But this is an issue that Congress needs to set the parameters for and direct the executive branch to implement. And I want the witnesses to comment on my legislation that seeks to do that, H.R. 760, the Chinese Military and Surveillance Company Sanctions Act, which would expand on those executive orders and extend the full weight of Treasury sanctions against these Chinese military industrial complex and surveillance companies while allowing U.S. investors to continue to invest in benign companies in emerging growth markets. So, Mr. Williams, let me start with you. Is this approach, my bill, is it a good way? Is it the best way to ensure that capital flows don't fund the Chinese military industrial complex? And when you answer that question, I want you to address the two gaps that you talked about in your prepared testimony. Does my bill get at those two gaps, specifically the private equity and venture capital piece, and also the multilateral impact, the other international non-U.S. investors?
So thank you, Congressman, and I think you're absolutely right that we need to have a statutory basis for these actions, and that Congress should work on that in a very studied and thorough way. I also agree with you that we want to expand on the existing restrictions. And what I describe in my testimony, and I believe your bill addresses it, but we can work on the technical aspects of it, is number one, the current executive order only applies to investment in public securities. That should also be expanded to private investment. And secondly, the current EO only applies to a limited subset of sectors within China. There may be national security threats in other sectors, and we need to be able to look at those as well. So I look forward to working with you on your legislation.
Yeah, I want to expand it also to technology-related companies, dual-use technology, AI, other things that implicate national security. And I agree, the executive orders don't address that. My bill, though, Mr. Williams, it would address, with using OFAC sanctions, it would address that private equity venture capital piece, right?
That's my understanding.
And then, Mr. Fetto, to your point about the Casey Cornyn approach and the Committee on National Critical Capabilities, similar to reverse CFIUS, I appreciated your point that creating a bureaucracy that ensnares a lot of benign outbound investment is maybe not the targeted approach we need. Can you expand on that testimony? And why would the OFAC approach, a simple, clear message, signal to the private sector, green light, red light, be better than a bureaucratic approach such as this Committee on National Critical Capabilities?
In the first instance, it would be far more nimble. And with a committee, you have inefficiencies. The committee, I'll just say, one of the deficiencies I see with a committee setup is you can't unring the bell. Once you do this, for example, and I'm a big fan of CFIUS, and I think it's a great tool and appropriately used and focused on national security, but it's been around for 50 years, okay? And so if we create a new bureaucracy to screen outbound, it's going to be here. And so I do agree that the OFAC approach seems to me to be an approach that hasn't been adequately explored. And
thank you.
In a prohibition context, making these like SDNs, it prohibits all dealing. So private equity and venture capital would be in the mix.
And Mr. Williams, in my remaining time, I appreciate your focus on pairing defensive actions with offensive actions to maintain U.S. economic strength. In response to Mr. Harrell's testimony about the debt limit, can you speak to the overspending in Washington and how that compromises the dominance of the dollar and how we need to pair avoiding default with reform?
The gentleman's time has expired.